Hello, my name is Craig Fraker. I'm with the Goochland Powhatan Master Gardener Association, and I am for the soil because I like to play in the dirt.
It is a great pleasure to welcome you to this episode of For the Soil, a conversation. I'm your host, Jeff Ishee, and my co-host will be joining me in just a few moments with a very interesting guest. But first, I wanted to remind you of a new resource available on our website, forthesoil.org. But before we even do that, I want to ask you a question. Did you know that schools in the United States throw away $5 million worth of uneaten food every school day? I didn't know that. That is an amazing statistic, but it is a fact, and it is a resource. Matter of fact, we've just posted a new resource on the website. It's called Composting Made Easy, a beginner's guide to school-based composting. I think you'll find that very interesting, as I did. And I think we can all get involved with helping our schools to recycle, so to speak, that wasted food into valuable soil and improving our soil health. So once again, that's at our website, forthesoil.org. And in the upper right-hand corner, just click on blog, and there you'll see it right at the top of the page, a beginner's guide to school-based composting. Now let's get to our episode for this week. Welcome, everyone, to For the Soil, a conversation. I'm your host, Jeff Ishee. Dr. Eric Bendfeldt is also co-hosting today. Dr. Bendfeldt is with Virginia Cooperative Extension, Community Viability. Mary Sketch Bryant is normally a co-host, but she continues her work in the field this week. And Sarah Koth with the For the Soil Coalition is joining us, does a lot of work on the website, forthesoil.org, as well as blog writing, very involved in sustainable agriculture. And Sarah, I believe you have a special guest that you want to reintroduce from our previous episode.
Yes, thank you, Jeff. And we continue to be excited and honored to have Kathy Yoder join us for a conversation today. And I've gotten to work with Kathy in Harrisonburg and Rockingham County in Virginia at Vine and Fig. And she is the director of the Educational Outreach Program at Vine and Fig. And Kathy, could you tell us a little bit more about the programs? I know this part one, we got to hear more about the food access, a lot more about the farm to school and the composting, but we'd love to dive more into those programs with you.
Yes. Okay, thanks. Yeah, we are a nonprofit downtown Harrisonburg on the north side. That's one of the sustainable living centers. And then what I do is I go out to the schools and I'm in the school gardens. I work with Andrea Early on farm to school activities for Harrisonburg City Schools and compost education. And then we also work on nature trails, getting out. Our main goal is getting kids outdoors and experiencing nature, because those kids that have a green space at an early age are more apt to care for their environment as when they're adults. And so that's really important. Also, it really helps with the mental health. It helps with imagination, creativity, self-esteem. When you're outside, engaging all those senses, it's really lifts your spirits. One superintendent one time come into the garden and he's like, oh my goodness, this is like, the stress is just like leaving me right now because this garden is just amazing. So that was a fun little thing about him. I didn't think about that part of engaging all your senses and how it would just kind of relieve your muscles would kind of just loosen up or whatever.
You know, working in nature has that impact on a lot of people. If you're working in a cubicle or working in an office environment, or in my case, a studio, it's so reinvigorating to go outside and piddle in the garden and to get your hands dirty and plant something and then watch it grow and nurture it. Very important. Kathy, you mentioned a person. It's obvious that you're very proactive in education, especially with young people. You mentioned a name that I think deserves more recognition. Andrea Early in Rockingham County. I've known her for a long time, and she has been a real inspiration for change in so many areas of the educational system. Can you talk a little bit about her and what you've done with her?
Yeah, so she hired me as a Farm to School Week coordinator. So it's a week in October, the first week in October, that there are activities throughout the whole division for getting to know farmers and serving the produce from local farms and having like an apple crunch. The crunch heard around the Commonwealth is something that is throughout all of Virginia, just recognizing Virginia agriculture and local farms. And so that is something that I've always wanted. We actually met at like downtown at one of the Halloween costume stores. It was so funny. We had this really great conversation because my sons were going to public school and she helped change some things that were happening in the cafeteria. And I thanked her for that. And then I said, by any chance, if you ever want to do anything with gardening or whatever. And then years later, I come back to her after I've been away from the school system and said, Andrea, I really would like to do something. And she says, hey, why don't you do this farm to school coordinating? And then I got hired on as a special education assistant while I was coordinating this too. And so it was really interesting. And then I just wanted to take it to another level. And so I went to Vine and Fig, and then that way I can do this work every day.
Well, thank you, Kathy. We're fortunate to have Andrea Early as the school nutrition director for Harrison City Public Schools. And Andrea works closely with Gerald Lehman in Rockingham County Public Schools. And you just indicated the importance of collaboration. I know New Community Project and Vine and Fig collaborates with a lot of organizations. And you could speak a little bit more about that, because you've also mentioned the trail and bike and walking trails.
Yeah. So are you thinking more with Harrisonburg City Schools in general, or just?
I think in general, just, Harrisonburg prides itself on being walkable and bikeable.
Yes.
In the city.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So Vine and Fig were organized by our overall nonprofit. Is called New Community Project. Then the Sustainable Living Center, which is in Harrisonburg, is called Vine and Fig. Well, right next to Vine and Fig is the North End Greenway, and that provides access for bikers from the north, bikers and walkers from the north side of town, like over in the EMU area and to downtown. And so people that live in that area can walk downtown to work, or like I know a family that used to be a resident, not a family, but a couple that used to be a resident, one of our sustainable living centers and one of the houses. And then they moved into one of the mobile home parks, and then they were able to walk to work and not have a car because there is that bicycle path. So there's lots of incubator projects that Vine and Fig has. And that's not necessarily the work that I do, but I do the educational piece. I'm out in the, the schools, school garden, and nature trails, composting, and working on food access. But we definitely teach, we care for those spaces. If we see a bicycle path that we're working close to, because we're in a garden somewhere, we'll clear that space so that those spider webs don't get on those bicyclists as they pass through. We'll make sure that there's like 3 feet wide access for them. So like we were at Thomas Harrison Middle School Garden, and we saw the bicycle path down below was having harder access there. But now they have this beautiful Friendly City bicycle path, which is great, because I don't know if you heard about blue zones, because that is a new term that was new to me, because JMU reached out to us because they wanted us to share about walkability and bikeability and about community gardens. And so that is something that I've kind of, have been looking into.
A bit of those trails is that they do connect several of the grocery stores in the Harrisonburg area as well. When we think about food access, then in some cases you don't have to jump in your car to go to the grocery store, that you could either bike or walk. And I think that's another aspect of food access. So that's really great to see.
Yeah. So our food access work really tries to decrease the amount of time spent in a car. So we try to, I'm going to give a shout out to Radical Roots Farm, Jubilee Climate Farm, and St. Isidore Homestead and Permaculture Farms, because on this project that we're working on with 18 different organizations in Harrisonburg, including lots of youth organizations where we provide the educational recipes and things, reducing that transportation, we're taking the food directly to those locations where those families are. And then that it limits the amount of time that the fresh vegetables have to be refrigerated. And more research shows that nutritional vegetables, there's more and more nutritional value in these vegetables if raised in healthy soil. And so some of the crops that you might get somewhere else might not have the nutritional value that one at a local farm that was freshly harvested, that has a great root system, that it's able to absorb those nutrients better, can provide. And those people that are in transitions or they're homeless, we work with all different kinds of organizations who've identified those marginalized populations and what they need. So we listen with them, what kind of foods would they like to have. Actually, Jubilee Climate Farm is raising sweet potato greens because Church World Service asked for sweet potato greens and they couldn't find it at any of the grocery stores. So yeah.
We're talking today with Kathy Yoder, Director of Educational Outreach Program with an organization called Vine and Fig. And Sarah, I believe you had a question.
Yes, Kathy. Just thinking about what you had mentioned about just the mental health and being outside in nature and working with these collaborations and really building a community. There's just such a wonderful, passionate voice that I hear in your tone. And I shared that when I got to work with you at Vine and Fig and just had that deep breath as soon as I walked into the Sustainable Living Center area. And I just wondered, just a personal story from you of what was kind of your aha moment of this is a good spot to really create that community and build those partnerships.
So, I was an employee of Harrisonburg City Schools for quite a while. And so when I see children walking into the garden, they can, they're not with any electronics. They're hearing the bird sounds. They're seeing the feathery part of the asparagus. They're sitting on a stump and they're picking up that stump and finding a salamander underneath. So all those things are like a sense of wonder. It's almost like magical. And then when you turn food waste into something that you can apply to the garden as fertilizer, to the soil, they just see it. If we can create that magical experience, they really engage. And so when children, are following 1 step, 2 step, 3 step, more and more directions, they're building. So if I work with children with special needs, they're able to work on their individual educational plans out there. And so that love of that experience, having with those children, and I thank them for that experience, and taking that then to Vine and Fig as I transition from the school system to a nonprofit that works very closely with the school system and with other school systems too. I mean, we're with Rockingham County also, and we're working with a Boys and Girls Club at South River with the new farm that's on our project with the Food Access Project, where we purchase the food and then we provide the educational recipes, that kind of thing. So so that's how it led, in the garden with those personal relationships with those students, seeing how they light up, what it brings to them and how they're learning and how they're able to retain it. And they repeat it over and over. I mean, gardening is repetitive. I mean, you work with the soil and, when the kids find worms, that is the most, I'll never forget when I took coffee ground, from my home compost, I took a coffee filter and inside that coffee filter were all these red wigglers. And so you would have no idea that 50 or so worms were inside this coffee filter. But I put it out on the picnic table and the screams on the playground, like the teachers were all like, what just happened? And we were laughing and, it was all, I just love the screams of children when they are having
Discover
fun in the
something.
garden. Yeah. And realize that they can hold a worm. It's not the most, and what was another really, this is kind of different than your question, Sarah, is that one time there was this plant, swamp milkweed, which is absolutely fantastic to plant. It's not just milkweed, it's a certain variety of milkweed that has a lot that it provides for many different organisms in the garden. So what happened was there were these caterpillars, there was aphids, there were these assassinator beetles all on this depleted plant. And the kids were watching this over and over. Well, so the gardens are there so that children can have these experiences, but then they also learn how to care for that environment because, there was this time when somebody came and they wanted to squash those caterpillars, and they took the caterpillar to a different location and they wanted to squash it. And instead of, being really upset with that person, we went ahead and said, the other kids were explaining to them what was happening, what they were watching. And if you take that away, it's not okay. And then we said, why don't you watch so this doesn't happen again? Because this is what it means to this garden space. So that student, was then aware of, and he would run in through the garden when we were there. But it was then, he was just aware of what it meant to so many people.
Education is so important with our young people, and education, of course, we're talking about soil health and agriculture, but I'd like to pick your brain, and we've got about 2 minutes remaining in this episode, Kathy, but I'd like to pick your brain. I suspect we have some school teachers listening to the podcast today, maybe people who are involved with homeschooling, people who are involved in education of some sort. What are some resources that you might recommend about soil health and about the importance of knowing where your food comes from? And I'm going to list the first one. That's your website. vinefigeducation.org is a wonderful website. Lots of information there about composting, nature trails, farm to school efforts. But what other resources are available to educators?
Yeah, so we created during COVID, we created a composting manual. It's called Composting Made Easy. If you go to the tab on our website, you can click on composting, and then you can go to download this manual. And it's called A Beginner's Guide to School-Based Composting for Harrisonburg City Schools. And it was with Ben Stutzman from Eastern Mennonite University, and he was an environmental sustainability capstone student who was very interested in composting too. So together we wrote this manual along with Jill Hart, who was the principal at the time, Amy Sabari, and Andrea Early. But it has a lot of resources on there, and it's a live document, so we keep updating it all the time. So it just is the compost basics. And there's a flow chart about how to get started with composting and the safety of it, and pest control, moisture, carbon and nitrogen, and all these different things. And that has been really helpful. And then if you have any questions, you can always email me at kyoder450@gmail.com. And the cooking with vegetables, teaching your kids how to cook, that's really important. Yeah, when you start cooking with food that you're growing, or with food that the local farmers are creating and growing, then you learn a lot about your food system.
Well, Kathy Yoder, Director of Education and Outreach for Vine and Fig. And once again, that web address is vinefigeducation.org. And on behalf of my co-host, Eric Bendfeldt and Sarah Koth, Kathy, thank you for everything you're doing. I hope you continue what you're doing. It's so important. Thank you for joining us today.
Well, thanks for having me.
Sarah and Eric, we'll see you in the next one.
Thank you, Jeff and Kathy.
Thank you, Jeff and Kathy.
For the Soil, a conversation is made possible with funding support from the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation and the Agua Fund. Other partners include the USDA's Natural Resources Conservation Service, Virginia Cooperative Extension, Virginia State University, Virginia Department of Conservation and Recreation, and partners of the Virginia Soil Health Coalition. Views expressed on this podcast are those of each individual guest. To download a copy of this or any other episode, visit the website forthesoil.org. And if you should have a specific question about soil health, call your local extension office, your local USDA service center, or a soil and water conservation district office. Music used during today's program is provided courtesy of Mr. Smith. All rights reserved. For the Soil, a conversation is produced by On the Farm Radio in collaboration with Virginia Tech. I'm your host, Jeff Ishee.